What's going on, guys? It's Stephen with The Forge, covering days 42 through 46 today. I was on call last week, so I just didn't really have the opportunity to sit down and focus and create the videos, but I still read, and it was still a huge blessing. All right, so this one's going to be a little different. I'm going to be going over Exodus 11 through Exodus 18. And then at the end of all of that, I'm going to go over the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 18 and 19, since we read that as well. So yesterday at church, we had a really cool discussion. We were able to talk about the 2-year reading plan with those who actually done it, and even those who didn't. We were all able to take away from it. A few people are joining us. You can join us too. We're only in Exodus chapter 18. If you've been watching the videos, go ahead and just join us in chapter 18. If you haven't, join us in chapter 18. Watch the videos. And then if you want, go back and read. I'm pretty sure Jesus will forgive you. So let's get into it. Day 42, Exodus 11 and 12. This is when God says that there will be the death of the firstborn, and there will be a wailing in the lands that's never been heard before. That you'll be able to tell the difference between the Israelite and the Egyptian. And then that's huge, right? Like if you were Moses and you're hearing this, or even the Israelites or the Egyptians, whoever it is, you're hearing it and you're saying, there's going to be a huge cry. What does that mean? And how are they going to tell the difference between us? And then we find out in chapter 12 that the Passover is instituted, and that because of the lamb's blood over the doorpost is the reason why you will tell the difference between the Israelite and those who were Egyptians. Because everything that was firstborn, animals, person, everything was dying. And the only ones that lived were those who were in the home. And when there was blood over their doorpost, the death angel would pass over them, wouldn't knock on the door to see who was in there. He would pass over because he saw the blood. And when after that happened, then Pharaoh let the Israelites go, and then the Israelites did what was commanded. Then they asked the Egyptians for all kinds of stuff. They got silver, gold, and clothing, right? And then they were able to leave. They got all the goodies and took off. And then while they were leaving, we'll see in Exodus chapter 13, this is when the Feast of the Unleavened Bread was instituted. And then we'll also find out this is when God established that he will lead them through the wilderness by a cloud in the day and by a pillar of fire by night. So the Israelites are leaving to the wilderness, and they're being guided by God by a cloud during the day and by a pillar of fire by night. They have his presence with them. Okay. They've seen all these plagues. And actually I'm going to have a link in the show notes here. You'll be able to follow it. It kind of goes over the different gods that God was attacking that were what the Egyptians recognized through the plagues. Let me backtrack a little bit so I can explain that better. So, with all these plagues, God was specifically targeting a god that the Egyptians worshipped. You're not going to find it in scripture, right? So, if you're going to text me or email me or whatever and say that you're not quoting scripture, I'm not trying to quote scripture. But if you look it up, find out for yourselves what the Egyptians worshipped and didn't worship, you'll find out that every single plague correlated to a god or a deity or whatever you want to call it that the Egyptians had as their God, and God attacked them directly. So, that being said, God guiding them by a cloud in the day and by a pillar of fire by night is a huge deal because the Israelites recognize that God is with them, not only through all the plagues where the Israelites saved, but then also while they're leaving, they're getting all these things, and God's now leading them into the wilderness. And then in Exodus 14, we find out that they crossed the Red Sea on dry land, that Moses puts his staff, widens, right? The sea widens, and then the Israelites are able to cross on dry land. And then the Egyptians are pursuing them. They get to the other side, but God slows the Egyptians down, Pharaoh's soldiers down, slows their chariots down, does all kinds of stuff. And then when they get to the other side, then God says, "Now I want you to go ahead and put your staff down and close the Red Sea on them." So it closed on them, and the Egyptians were dead. So then the Israelites saw that too. So imagine they're seeing all these things before they leave Egypt, knowing that they serve the God of gods. And then they sing a song of praise in chapter 15. And then in chapter 16, God feeds his children with food from the air, right? Or manna falls down, and then meat is also there as well. So they find out in the morning, they wake up and they have manna, like when the dew clears, you got manna all over the ground. And then in the nighttime, they have meat for them to pick up, right? Quail, I believe is what it is. So they were fed in the morning and the evening, and they were told not to keep extra. Some people always did, even though they literally saw all these things God's did. They still didn't trust him, I guess. And then they wanted to hold on to a little extra just in case. And when they did, it rotted out, and Moses got frustrated with them. And then we're going to see in Genesis chapter 17, sorry, Exodus chapter 17, that God gives them water from a rock, that they're saying, we should have just died in Israel, in Egypt, right? We should have just stayed. We're going to die out here in the wilderness. So then God tells Moses to do what he's going to do. Water flows from the rock, and God then gives them water to drink. So you see that God leads them, God feeds them, and God satisfies their thirst. And then we also find out that not only does God do all that, but when they come across the Amalekites, that God brings them victory. He protects them. That when Moses' staff is up, the Israelites win the battle. When the staff comes down, the Israelites lose. And Moses had a big job, right? He's having to hold up the staff, so he was super sore because I guess he missed shoulder day. So they put rocks underneath him, I think is what it says, so to hold his arms up, to help hold his arms up, and people were helping him so they could win that battle. So we see that God leads them, God feeds them, God satisfies their thirst, and God protects them and leads them to victory. So you see that God's really taking care of them throughout this whole time. And then in Exodus 18, Moses' father-in-law Jethro shows up, gives him advice, says, "Hey man, I see you're doing all these, you're sitting in front of these people day and night, bringing judgment or providing judgment for their problems they have with each other. That's a lot of work for a man. So why don't you pick some elders, some wise men amongst your community, teach them the ways of the law, and then they can judge their own people. And then if there's a matter too big for them not to judge, they bring it to you." So Jethro was a good father-in-law. And then in days 42 and day 45, we are in the Gospel of Matthew 18 and 19. So in Matthew 18, the greatest question is, who is the greatest? And then Jesus says the greatest is those who basically humbles themselves as a child, right? I say basically because I'm paraphrasing. So they're looking for who's the best because of the works they do. Jesus says, he who is the best is he who humbles himself as a child. And then in that same chapter, Jesus talks about how the shepherd rejoices when he goes out and finds the one lost sheep out of the 99, right? He rejoices when he finds that sheep. And then in chapter 19, Jesus is explaining to them the most important thing when it comes to, well, hold on, let me backtrack. Not the most important thing. Jesus explained to them the most important commandment when it comes to the 10 commandments. And he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so we see in days 42 through 46 that God is with the Israelites that we obviously know, right? God is with the Israelites since the beginning. And he's with them while they're in Egypt, when they're in the land of Goshen that God gave them, and they're multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And then Pharaoh then tells them, says, I'm going to make them our slaves because they're going to rise against us with our enemies. Then God hears their cry, and then God delivers them, and the Israelites see that God is with them this whole time. Then God has guided them by a cloud and a pillar of fire. Then they cross the Red Sea. God then kills and protects, God kills their enemy, thus protecting them. Then God provides them food in the morning and food at night. Then God provides them water to quench their thirst. And then they go to war with the Amalekites. And if Moses holds up this staff that they've seen God use to save them, right? Then they win. If it drops, they lose. God was with them this whole time. And I really actually, let me backtrack to that staff. I thought it was really cool and God's super smart when it comes to him using the staff as a representation of his power as opposed to just Moses' hands. Right? Because if it was Moses' hands, maybe they would have worshiped Moses a little more. But when Moses was doing everything that God commanded him with the staff, then they recognized that God's power was with Moses, and God used that staff and Moses to bring what God wanted to bring. And then in chapter 19 of Matthew, Jesus is to love your neighbor as yourself. So I hope that as you go out throughout your week this week, that you recognize that just like how God was with the Israelites, God is with you and with me, and that he protects us all times. And that just like he was with the Israelites, guiding them with the cloud and the pillar of fire, he's living inside of us if we've given our lives to him. He's living inside of us and he's guiding us the same exact way. And that we're on this side of the cross where we can read all these stories and we have blessing upon blessing that we can, so we can really apply it to our lives. And then as you're out there and you remember that God is with you through all things as he was with the Israelites, perhaps it'll make it easier for you to love your neighbor as yourself, recognizing that I'm blessed and I love myself a lot. So I'm going to love you the same exact way. I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you guys join us on this reading plan. Um, God bless and have a nice day. Bye.